Hello, everyone. This is Deborah Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of 55 plus training sessions that will help you and your team avoid fraud, compliance fines, and bad vendor data. Or just sign up to get access to vendor process FAQs and to attend weekly drop-in live Q&A sessions. Visit training.deborahrrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. Are you still collecting vendor supporting documents by email? Well, don't worry about that. You are not alone. But this process, as you know, does carry its own share of organizing issues and fraud risks. So today, I have 3 tips that can help you mitigate that fraud risk and organize your inbox and responses. Plus, stay until the end to hear where you can get 17 more tips for free. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 237. 3 tips to manage your inbox when collecting vendor supporting documents by email. This content is actually coming from a LinkedIn newsletter that I published on Monday of this week. And I wanted to share it here because I didn't want only those that consumed my content via the podcast to miss out on it because, as I said before, it also identifies where you can go to get a total of 20. So that's 17 more tips. And I will talk about that after I give you these 3. So before I sign off, I'll tell you where you can go to get 17 more. But in any event, let's go ahead and get started with these 3 tips. Again, this is coming from a LinkedIn article. And if you are on LinkedIn and you would like to subscribe to it, I will put a link to this article or newsletter in the show notes. So make sure you check the show notes and you click through, and then you can subscribe. And whenever I post one, it's usually the first week of the month, but it could vary. But whenever I post it, you'll get a notification, and you'll be able to go directly to that content and read it. All right, so 3 tips. The first one, I am dealing with authentication, right? Making sure you know who you're getting it from. And if any of you have followed any of my podcasts, listened to multiple episodes, read any of my blogs, and now any of my newsletters on LinkedIn, you knew that this was coming. This was going to be the first thing that I say. And so one is authenticating the requester and the vendor information submitted. So make sure you know you are communicating with your internal employee if that's how you get your vendor documents, or make sure you know you are communicating with your vendor. And that is before you even send instructions for a vendor add or change, or before you accept the submitted vendor supporting documentation. And so let's break this down. So part one of this is before sending instructions for a vendor add or change, you want to make sure that you ask 2 to 3 identifying questions to verify that you are actually communicating again with your internal team member or with your vendor and not with a fraudster. Now, only after they answer the question successfully do you send the instructions and or the forms required for whatever request they inquired about. And so you want to do just like, for example, when you contact your bank. And actually, it's more places now that will do that. I tried calling my cable company and they asked me 2 to 3 identifying questions. So your bank, your cable company, probably your credit card company will do the same thing. They will ask you identifying questions, either asking so you can repeat them, or it might be part of the automated process before you even get to a customer service rep, just to make sure that you are who you say you are. And when you do that to a fraudster, they are more than likely going to abandon that request. If they're calling you on the phone, they're probably going to just hang up and they're going to go on to the next potential victim that's not asking those questions. Now, if you'd like to build an authentication reference matrix, I call it, so that you have multiple pieces of information that you can ask them, I have a link in the LinkedIn article for a free training session that I have called Build an Authentication Matrix so your vendor team and help desk do not communicate with a fraudster. So make sure you click through to the article and then you click in that first section and you'll see it. It'll be hyperlinked and you can click through and take that class and have your whole department or vendor team or even your AP team, whoever or whomever, I don't know which way I'm supposed to say that, but whomever responds to inquiries or vendor requests, either via email, and this can also be via phone as well. So that would be a good option for them to take. And again, it doesn't cost you anything. And you are making sure that you are dealing with your internal team members or your vendors and not a fraudster. So get them out of the way quickly. All right. Part 2 of this is before processing whatever submitted vendor supporting documentation they have, you want to make sure that the forms that you give them to fill out to fulfill that request. So if they have a new vendor ad, maybe you have a vendor setup form. If they have a vendor change, then you give them your own vendor banking form. And why would you want to do that? Because you want to make sure that you're including authenticating data on those forms so that the vendors have to fill that information in. And what do I mean by authenticating data? I mean that, for example, if your vendor wants to change their banking, then they have to give you the existing banking. You can also include things like their tax ID. You can include their remittance address. And so this way, when you get that information or that form back in, you can compare it to what you have on your vendor record. And if it's not the same, then that is a huge red flag. Or if they don't have it, that is a huge red flag. 9 times out of 10, though, just like the original, when you authenticated the requester initially, they are going to just abandon the request and go to someone else, another potential victim. Again, that's not asking for this information. Now, I do understand that these fraudsters are in your vendor's email because they've been so successful with all of these phishing attacks and getting these logins from your vendors. And so they may have access to that information. But again, you're not accepting what they give you. You are making them go through your hoops to fill out your forms. And so it may still be too much of a bother to go all the way through with it and completing your forms. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but you will definitely lose those fraudsters that don't have that information. So it is worth it to create your own forms, your vendor setup forms, your vendor banking forms, to collect the information that you require versus accepting whatever it is the vendor decides to give you. Now, once you receive that information, check it against the vendor record to make sure it matches. And that's what I mean by authenticating the data. All right, so that was a two-parter. The first one was a two-parter, the authenticate the requester and the vendor information submitted. Now, the second one more has to or has more to do with your inboxes itself. So separate email addresses for vendor requests and invoice requests. And I have to tell you, I come across quite a few clients where everything they're getting in AP is coming all into the same inbox. And so vendor requests that are processed by vendor team members really need to be separated from invoice requests processed by non-vendor team members, but they're all coming in the same inbox. So why do they need to be separated? Well, because no, that will mean or it will uphold that least privilege access, right? So no non-vendor team member will be exposed to sensitive data such as a social security number that could be on the IRS W-9, for example, or maybe a bank account number, banking information that's on a vendor banking form. If you're getting all that in email and you've got multiple groups of folks that are looking at that email or responding to requests, they now can have access to see that. Further, even more, if you have a different vendor team member or team members assigned to like different vendor types, I would think about creating a separate inbox just for that vendor type. So as a practitioner, my vendor team process both US and non-US vendors. And we actually had different processes, which you probably do too, for US versus non-US. We also had different ERPs form too, different accounting systems. Actually, we had the same accounting system, just a different instance of the system, if that makes sense. But in any event, what I ended up doing is we had certain team members assigned to US and we had certain team members assigned to non-US. And so I created a separate email address for each. But you don't want to go crazy. It needs to make sense to the vendor team members that will be using it, but it may help to organize and also process requests faster if the team members that are assigned to those requests can easily access them. So now they don't have to, the vendor team member doesn't have to, look through invoices that are received, emails that have invoices on them in order to get to their requests that they need to process. And the same thing on the AP invoice team member side. They don't have to scroll through vendor information that's only meant for the vendor team, and they don't have to process it. So now they don't have to have that noise of additional emails in the way. All right, so that was the second one. The third one, I actually really love this, and this was at my last place of employment when I first got there, although it's a living document, probably always will, just like all desktop procedures or standard operating procedures, whatever you call them. But I would create a frequently asked questions reference document, and it can be just like a desktop procedure, same format, maybe same format as your SOPs, but it just has some different information in it. So it makes, the reason that I say that is really two things. It makes the process of finding a quick answer to frequently asked questions easier for team members responding to the inquiry. Plus, when they get there, right, they can just copy and paste the response. And that makes it easy for training new team members. And the second thing that it does is it ensures that all team members are saying the same thing. And so that is actually really huge. And some of you know what I'm talking about, maybe more than others, because you've got bigger teams. But this eliminates, right, those internal team members and maybe even some of your vendors that are sending multiple inquiries, hoping they get different answers, i.e. answers that they want versus answers that they don't, especially if they're trying to ask for something that's outside of the process. Now, these frequently asked questions works for calls as well as emails, because instead of copying and pasting them into an email, you can just say them as a script, or the team can just say them as a script. So assign someone to update this, because again, it's a living document on a regular basis, because you want to add your new frequently asked questions. They typically will change, especially if you're overhauling your process or tweaking it a bit. So make sure that you have someone assigned to update it so that they can revise existing responses as necessary based on your changing processes. And I started to say earlier that what I really like about putting them into like a desktop procedure or SOP, a standard operating procedure, is that you can have a clickable table of contents. And that means that you can have the frequently asked questions, whatever they are, listed and then in the table of contents, and then all someone has to do is click on it and then they get to the answer. Now, if you're not familiar with Microsoft Word, I don't know how to do it in Google Docs, but I'm sure it's just as easy. But in Microsoft Word, it's all based on the style. And so the heading that you use, depending on the table of contents format that you pick or select, the heading will determine what's included in the table of contents. And they've got several different headings, again, depending on which table of contents format you select. So if you're not familiar with it, it's not that hard to learn, or give it to someone who is. And this will be something great that will make responding to inquiries and requests much easier for the team when they're doing that via email, or a bonus, via phone calls as well. All right, so those are the three, and I'll go over them again. The first one is authenticate the requester and the vendor information submitted. The second one is you need separate email addresses for vendor requests and invoice requests. And then the third one is responding to inquiries. Create a FAQs, frequently asked questions reference. All right, so it is time to talk about the resource that you have, or that I am offering, to get 17 more tips. So if you've got 30 minutes, you can get a total of 20 tips. And that's 17 more because I just gave you 3. So this is in a free webinar. And if you haven't noticed, every month I have a free webinar that is called 20 Tips in 20 Minutes. It's a series that I have, and I give you those 20 tips in 20 minutes, and it's on a different topic. Well, May's topic, and this will be May 24th, is managing your inbox when collecting vendor supporting documents by email. So that's a hint and a half, because that's the name of this podcast. So 20 tips in 20 minutes is actually a 30-minute webinar by the time we get through the intro, the problem, and then have some time for questions. But there are immediate takeaways for handling incoming emails, your inbox, and you can get more information on Payment Knox for AP. That is from NS Knox, and it's an automated B2B payments fraud solution for payments fraud solution. And so if any of you out there have asked me or are wondering, how do you validate bank account ownership information via, or not via, but US and non-US, so just globally, right? This is what you need to get more information on. It's the Payment Knox solution through NS Knox. And so I will put the link to sign up for this free webinar. Again, it's only 30 minutes and I will give you 20 tips in 20 minutes, but I'll put the link to that webinar in the show notes. So make sure you click through. It's also in the LinkedIn newsletter as well. So either way, you can get to it, sign up for it. And if for whatever reason you are not able to make it, no worries. We will send you a link so that you can watch the recording and download any handouts that you missed. All right. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 237th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.